and welcome to yet another edition of Frankie Has a Big Mouth. That's right, you heard it. I do. I have a big mouth with big guests, big ideas, and big solutions. Glad to have you back. Of course, you can listen to the podcast on the iHeart Radio Network or wherever you get your podcasts. In addition to Real Times Media, welcoming them to the family, and of course my family at the Black Information Network. I'm so excited. This is show number 2. You don't want to miss this. We bring the big guests as well to talk about the issues of the day. Let me take an opportunity before we get into introducing my guests, what we're going to talk about today. One, following up on last week's conversation about curfew, particularly this time of the year, when young people are out, and we've seen the violence across the country. And with that said, a number of those individuals are getting younger and younger, as young as 10 years old in Chicago, carjacking, getting charged as an adult. 2 big stories this week we're going to talk about. In addition to that, yes, Mr. Bill Cosby, R. Kelly, and this week, legendary boxer George Foreman, dealing with the issues of sexual assault. We're going to talk about celebrity black men. Are they under attack? And most of these individuals, quite frankly, some are black women. We're going to talk about that. Let me introduce my guest. She is amazing. She joins me on my radio show regularly. You're not going to want to miss her and her commentary. Hello and good morning, attorney Tracy Burns.
Good morning, Frankie. I'm so happy to be here with you this morning.
Good to have you here. Let me introduce as well, frequently heard on my radio show as well, and a guest for our second podcast broadcast, attorney Shaka Johnson. Attorney Johnson, how are you?
I'm very well, Frankie. Thank you for having me. Good morning. I'm ready.
Good morning. Listen, you probably have seen him on national and quite frankly, international television. He is the CEO of Purpose PR, Mr. Andrew Wyatt. Mr. Wyatt, you may recognize when you saw the trial of Mr. Bill Cosby, who was guiding Mr. Cosby in and out of the courtroom. He and I recently happened to be getting lunch, and the gentleman behind the counter, who happened to be maybe a 65-year-old white man, said, "Where do I know you from?" And here he is. Andrew, welcome to Frankie Has a Big Mouth.
Hey, Frankie, thank you for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be with you, and back here from Birmingham, Alabama, so thank you.
You're so welcome. Let me start with this before we get into the topic. Andrew, that you are on the front line and dealing with Mr. Cosby. I want to follow up on last week's topic. What we talked about was curfews. There's a curfew in place in cities across the country where youth 15 and under have to be, 17 and under have to be in after 9:30. We talked about with our guests last week, well, it's hot. Everyone does not have air conditioning. You know, what are cities doing to provide opportunities for young people other than just saying, stay in the house? Well, this week, one major story where 5 teens were arrested in the city of Philadelphia. At least 3 of them have been arrested, but 5 are being sought after as a result of beating to death a 72-year-old man. The mother of the 14-year-old and 10-year-old turned them in 3 days after the incident. The 14-year-old was retained. He is now in custody and charged as an adult. 2 days later, the 15-year-old girl who gave the phone to the 10-year-old to record the incident and did attack the 72-year-old has been arrested and charged as an adult. And we're going to hear more about that story. So I want to go back just a little bit. And I'll start, first of all, Tracy, with you relative to the curfew. And yet we have teens who are still finding their way out. Let me be more specific. In this case, the incident occurred 4 days prior to it going into effect in the city of Philadelphia. But let me just start with you, Tracy. On the curfew, does it matter? Is it important? Does it work?
The curfew is very important. However, like anything else, it only works if government has the assistance of parents and the community to enforce it. When you know that your children are out, When you know your children are out, you give your children a time to be in. I don't know about anybody else. When I was 14 years old, we had the street light rule. When the street lights came on, you had to be sitting on the steps. We don't have parents doing that any longer. However, Frankie, we don't want to jump the gun, because I think that parents have to enforce curfews. I do. And then I think police are supposed to be the backup, but they are not supposed to be the first line of defense when it comes to knowing where your children are. Parents are supposed to be that first line of defense when it comes to knowing where your children are. However, I don't have enough information about the whereabouts of these particular parents. You know, what if mom worked overnight and she entrusted the 14-year-old to watch his brothers at home while she worked, because she was earning a living for the family? So with respect to, passing judgment, what I say about this particular case and the 14-year-old and the 10-year-old and even the rest of the kids is that we don't have enough information.
Tracy, but what we do know, first of all, by just judging from the size of this young man, at 14, he looks a lot older in terms of his body strength and girth. Being 14, there's some 14-year-olds who were at home. It's one thing that you're going to be out at 2:30 in the morning. In particular, we've got to hold these kids accountable for just being bad and being bad. I'm going to be the angel's advocate. The fact that mama worked, because there's some kids whose mama had to work and they were in the house and not out at 2:30 in the morning beating a man to death with a traffic cone. Andrew.
Well, look, I hear Attorney Burns, but that was a different era. It was a different structure. Generations have changed now. You don't have that influence of a real grandparent in the house. You don't have that influence of real parents in the house.
In some houses,
you're right. But we have seen these stories before. The revolution starts in the home. It starts with the parents, and you have cousins, you have somebody you should be able to call. Look, I grew up in Bessemer, Alabama in the projects. We didn't have an air condition, but we knew when grandma left the house and she said, let the windows up, I bet not hear you outside. It was a different era because the neighbor next door had responsibility over you. The neighbor in the back had responsibility on you. I think we have to hold these parents responsible until we see parents ended up as the mother turned the daughter in, she should have also turned herself in. That's just my opinion. I think if we start holding these parents accountable and you see them being arrested, it's going to be a trickle down effect to say, you know what? I don't want to be in this situation as a parent. I'm not going to jail for you. It's like when we were growing up, I don't care what city you grew up in, your parents always said to you, hey, boy, you represented my last name. Whatever you go do out here is a reflection on me. And I think we have to make it a reflection on the parents now and hold them accountable.
All right, Shaka. All right, I don't know if Shaka can hear me. I'm coming to Shaka. It looks like he may have frozen. Let me just go back to this part. Shaka, did you want to comment?
Yes, because we have to be very careful. Something happened with the stream there for a moment, but thank you for allowing me to say this. We have to be very, very careful, exceedingly careful. I can listen, Mr. Wyatt, Andrew, you said some things that I absolutely agree with, right? Which was there was a communal effort at one point in time, and different parties assumed agency over children who they were not biologically responsible for. That was the community effort. I am from the same fabric as I'm sure you and Tracy and even Frankie. But we have to be careful about throwing the proverbial baby out with the bathwater by saying now parents should be held criminally liable. You have to really respect the weight that suggestion has, because we live in an era where a system always goes too far. So once you start criminalizing this behavior, expect it to go to this behavior in terms of the criminalization. That means when you send your child to school, when you clothe them, put Vaseline on their cheeks and send them to school and they don't go, you will be criminalized. That means when they misbehave in school and get into a ruckus with another student or a teacher, you could be criminalized. It runs the risk of that slippery slope that we're all afraid of. So we have to be mindful as gatekeepers about what we're so flippant about criminalizing is all I'm saying.
All right. Now, Shaka, my question to you then would be, At what point, though, do we hold parents some level of responsibility? Do we show if there is a kid that's incorrigible that there's been where this parent has sought some kind of assistance or help? But there has to be a timeout. Being the angel's advocate, is there now a timeout for those children who aren't supervised, whose parents aren't supervising them, and they would be out at 2:30 in the morning beating a man to death?
Right. And so, you know, this is, I think, an outlier of an issue, because most 17-year-olds or 16-year-olds or even down to 10-year-olds who are out after the witching hour, let's call it, are not out beating people to death, right? So this case is an outlier. And so I would say there needs to be sort of a middle ground. We have to be mindful of a social issue being taken care of by the criminal justice system. This is a social issue. So for whatever litany of examples we could give of why a child might not be in the house, and maybe it's just because of what you said, maybe they're just incorrigible and the parents don't have control over them. That does not, there's a bridge. There has to be a bridge between that and the criminal justice system that involves police as the gatekeepers. There has to be something in between, whether it's a social service or something else, but it doesn't have to necessarily be our police districts.
All right.
Well, look, Frankie,
let me go to Andrew and then Tracy.
I heard all of that, but there's and Frankie might be familiar with this saying: excuses are tools of incompetence used to build monuments amount of nothingness, and those who use them seldom amount to anything. We have to quit making excuses for these behaviors that we see. People know in our community, especially, that the criminal justice system is not designed for us. People know in our community that the Constitution, which is not perfect, but it's all what we have right now to live by, is not designed for us, because when it was drafted, minus the amendments, it had no protections for us. So we know every day that when our child leaves a home, that he or she could possibly be racial profile. We have seen these stories before. So I think it's time, in my opinion, we can't keep giving excuses for parents who are not taking responsibility and accountability and making plans for their children to be safe.
So the net of what you're saying, what? The net of what you're saying?
The net of what I'm saying is simple, is the moms and dads, when they want to go work and hang out, or they want to go hang out, they find somebody to get them to where they want to go. They could do the same thing for their children. They could find somebody to supervise their children. I just can't understand why a child is out at 2:30 in the morning. It doesn't make any sense. I just don't see that one. I can't agree with the fact that we don't need to hold parents accountable. I just think until we see parents being arrested and charged as well, I'm not saying all, but until we see that, that's the only thing that's going to cause something to trigger in other parents' minds. Say, okay, she went to jail. I'm not going to jail for you and your behavior. All
right. And I think that speaks to Shaka's point about once they do, where's that gray line? But Tracy.
Frankie, I think that in this story, I'd be remiss if I did not mention the fact, and if we did not mention the fact that, these kids are heavily influenced by social media. And I think that while we're doing some policing, I think, it has to be something that we're doing here with social media, because I am extremely mindful that when they started beating the man, the 15-year-old handed the 10-year-old a camera so that their miscreant behavior could be recorded. Why? Because, people get likes with this stuff on social media, and they wanted to record it so that it could be posted.
Would you agree?
Okay.
But I got it, Tracy. I would agree, with all the social media sites that want to show the most egregious behavior, the most outrageous behavior. But in that moment, that the 10-year-old, 3 15-year-olds, and a 14-year-old said, in order to get likes, we're going to look at this 72-year-old man who is in front of us. Yeah, it would make great social media. But my character, my integrity, the fiber of who I am would not allow me to beat a man to death because social media says I can get likes.
Well, you just said it, character. integrity, your moral turpitude. They don't have it, Frankie.
Okay,
The revolution is in the home, Frankie. You have, and that's the only way you're going to be able to hold the parents responsible. You got to hold the parents responsible.
To your point, see, it's so easy to say that, but in terms of thought process, think about that. Who gets held responsible? The mother, who's the custodial parent, not the father, who may not have even been in the child's life. He's a parent. Does he get held responsible for not instituting fatherly ways and sort of helping guide that particular juvenile into perhaps a more morally acceptable fiber? Or is it just the mom? He lives in your house, it's just you. Dad, he's over there with his girlfriend. He skates scot-free. You have to be very careful about suggesting that we criminalize the parents. Every child has two parents. Whether they're both raising them is another story, but they have two parents. So now implementation becomes a problem. Does mom wear the onus of the criminality, but father help make the kid? Be careful about just saying the police are the catch-all, end-all to these solutions.
All right.
But when the father has never been there, how do you find somebody who's a ghost? So
that's criminal.
That's
criminal by itself.
But the mother is criminal. But that's their history. Okay, he's never been around. They probably, if they don't know their father. And I hear what you're saying, but somewhere down the line, somewhere in that home structure, there was a lack of something with the mother. Now, I don't want to judge her. I don't want to say I don't want to judge her, because we all judge people. God's judge people. I don't want to be overtly critical. But being overtly critical of her, because was she at work? We don't know where she was. Or was she hanging out?
Let me say this. And let me say this. And to that, and I don't know the details, haven't read the documents, have not interviewed the mother, and I hear both Shaka and Andrew, because to that, what she did do, hire an attorney, and brought both the 10 and 14-year-old in. There are a litany of topics we can talk about relative to this, but what she did do is bring in her 10-year-old and her 14-year-old, knowing the possibility that her 14-year-old may not leave prison for a long time. That was a lot, because we read the stories around the country where crimes are committed in Chicago and the young 14, 15-year-old ends up in Bessemer, Alabama, or Atlanta, or LA, or New York somewhere.
Detroit.
And it took the parent and a network of other family members or friends to send that young person across the country instead of to jail. I will just to this point acknowledge that this mother, when she realized what did happen, brought both those two boys in. And it just so happened that the 10-year-old was released because he did not assault the gentleman. He just recorded it at the hands of the 15-year-old girl that gave him the camera to record it. So there are some things that mother, who has been doing it on her own, I'm assuming because she only showed up, always mama's baby, daddy's maybe, showed up by herself with the attorney and left one of her boys at prison. She should be acknowledged for that, because there are a lot of mothers and uncles and brothers, and quite frankly, if more of us in the community, especially those communities that are challenged, start holding their brothers, sisters, sons, and others accountable for what they're doing, we'll see less of the repeat offenders on the street by turning them in like she did, just to that point.
Frankie, you're exactly right. And it goes back to, our initial point, Andrew. We don't have enough information before we pass judgment.
Yeah, but we saw the video, Trey.
It's a conversation.
I saw enough. Yeah, it is. I saw enough on the video that there's some major dysfunction there. I just don't believe that 5 children under the age of 15 are out at 2:30 in the morning, and their level of anger, their level of recklessness, to literally chase that man across the street, mama working, was the major issue.
Oh no!
In this particular situation,
and you have to you have to really take that mindset into the laboratory and say how did they develop this anger? Where did it come from? Did they see something in their home to make them, or what are they angry about? Are they angry because their mother or no parents at home? Are they angry because the house, maybe no electricity? Are they angry because there's no food in the house? We don't know that. And I hate to say that, all in America, to look at all black kids are this way. All black families are this way. And that cycle is what hurts us and hurt other black kids who are out there just might be having fun, skating, going to the skate park. But now you have made them a target, an even bigger target by law enforcement now.
Yeah.
Today.
Can I, as we get ready to make the transition in talking about our topic for today, I wanted to follow up on the curfew issue. And I just want to get each of your opinions on this. As we close out the entire topic, I'm going to give each of you about a minute or so to just respond on the curfew issue and this comment. I find it very interesting as well. And when I hear it, just to bring it to the forefront, that as a community, and I would say African Americans in particular, not even as much as Hispanics as there are Arabs in this country, that we are responsible for the behavior of every other person. Because when white America and somebody commits a crime, when Dylan Ruth walked in and shot up everybody, not one white person took responsibility or felt like they needed to take some responsibility or justification for that boy's behavior. But as soon as a young black person, and you all have known it, when we saw what happened in Virginia, when they had the DC sniper, we all sat and said, and we watched the story and said, oh, please don't let them be black. Please don't let them be black. How our community takes sole responsibility for people we don't know. And let me be real clear. I'm just as afraid of some of those communities and some of those people as anybody else that walks through that community. But it's interesting how we as a community take responsibility for the behavior of everybody else in our community. Andrew, 45 seconds. I'll start with you, Shaka, then Tracy, and we'll move on to our topic. Are black men under attack, particularly our celebrities? Andrew.
This is the topic, or you want to talk about the curfew?
No, I want you to wrap up your final comments on the curfew.
Well, look, I think curfews are needed, but it goes back to what Tracy said. You have to have parents working with the government to enforce the curfew, and not necessarily going down to City Hall, but they have to take responsibility for their own homes, and they have to say, every parent knows their child. I know my daughter, and their behaviors, and that some of them are sneaky, and I think you have to say, okay, am I giving this 14-year-old too much responsibility? And then you have to go find somebody in the family, a friend or someone house he or she can go over, and they can say, well, okay, look, I'm going to be getting off work at 2:30 in the morning, or I'm going to be going out with my girlfriend, celebrate my birthday, but I don't trust my children being alone. And he's not as responsible to make sure that the 10-year-old and all these other kids in the house are not going to go out. So I think it has to work hand in hand with government. But I think the parents do have to be held accountable, because that's the only way you're going to stop this, where it don't become a trickle down effect, what you just said earlier, Frankie, where all people and all black kids become targeted now, and say that every black kid is a problem, and every black kid that's out after hours is going to go murder someone. That's what we have to be careful about.
All right. 45 seconds, Shaka.
I think you have to be very mindful of what you described, Frankie, to me was a universal indictment on black people at large. When one of us or a small group of us do something that gets this sort of national attention, we all feel a little cringe, like, ooh, we just got set back a little bit. It just set us back a little bit. White America doesn't feel the same way. When something happens, it could be a very sad story, and they could be deeply, sad about it, but they don't feel an indictment on it. They just look at it like that's them and this is us. We are sort of cast into the same, light as a wrongdoer. And so with these children, in this particular case that we're referencing this morning, this is a social issue. When you look at what has happened with when the criminal justice system tried to deal with mental health, that was a terrible, terrible plan. There was a breakdown because they're not equipped for it, and you cannot criminalize mentally ill people in the same way as somebody conducting actual traditional criminal conduct. So this is a social issue as well. To Andrew's point about whether the parents are not taking that extra step, being responsible, making sure the kids are being looked after, etc., that doesn't jump over all the social issues that are potentially there into the jailhouse. There have to be social issues that I think. Listen, we have the Department of Human Services, we have DIFUS, we have to engage those people, to those organizations, to sort of come out of their offices. Everybody's getting a job, everybody has a check, everybody's got a pension. You got take-home cars. They give you a cell phone, a pager. You have to use these things and actually come out and give the services to the families. Document it. Maybe make parents come in and speak to, when I say come in, not to a criminal court, but to some officiating body to explain why my children were out. Now it's been documented. We've had this conversation with you, Ms. Darcell, 3 times about Omar being outside after a certain hour, that sort of thing. But it cannot go directly to a criminal space. It cannot go to police officers arbitrarily deciding who looks 17. What if you're a youthful looking 19-year-old? Now we're bypassing stop and frisk and using curfew to implement. Listen, I can see all the slippery slopes here, and I'm scared of them, quite frankly. All right, and these are the things that we fought to come out of. I don't want to go back to them in the name of trying to institute law and order.
All right, great. Let's go to Tracy as we close this topic.
Frankie, so it's they. Ooh, look at them. When I was raising my son, and as a custodial parent, my son and I had a whole bunch of conversations. Whenever something like that happened, and it was, someone black who committed, a certain offense, and it's getting this notoriety. And I would sit down and talk to my son, and I would say to him often, that was them. See, I'm like the white people. Look at them. I'm not taking it. I'm not internalizing that. That ain't my boy. That ain't the kids that I know. However, I absolutely positively had conversations with my son and his friends about the fact that there are people out here in this world who will see you. They will see the color of your skin. They will see the hairdo that you're wearing. They will look to see whether or not you're wearing earrings or whether or not you have on tattoos. And they are going to make certain judgments about you. And they are going to put you in this class. Therefore, it is incumbent upon you and me as your mother to tell you how to navigate that. See, it was all about conversation with me and my son and his friends. And I often had conversations that maybe his friends' parents disagree with, but I thought there was things that they needed to know. No, son, I'm not looking at you. I don't look at every young black man and think, oh my goodness, this is what they do. Because I recognize that white people commit crimes too. The thing that kills me the most and it irks my soul is the term black on black crime. White people commit crimes against white people also. People commit crimes where they live, but it's just sensationalized so much more when it happens in the black community. However, no, I don't personally internalize it, but I understand that it happens. And I, chose those moments as teaching moments for my son to say, listen, son, this is how you navigate this.
All right, great. Look, now let's move on to talk about, which is a huge topic. We've been talking about it for quite some time, and it has come to the forefront. And I'm so glad to have this panel as my guest in light of the last, let's just say, 25 days or so with the recent conviction of R. Kelly, last year convicted on 9 counts, sentenced to 30 years in prison on federal racketeering and sex trafficking charges. In addition to that, prosecutors asked for 25 years. His defense team asked for less than 10. He was sentenced to 30. Chances are he will do all 30. Just this week, the 1970s is when this incident is alleged to be happening. For those who are hearing it for the very first time, a legendary boxer, George Foreman, is on his way to court. Allegations against him, sexual assault that were alleged against him in the 1970s, more than 45 years ago, two women who started in January asking for $12.5 million in January from the boxer, now we know endorser, influencer, and the like. And it was his legal team this week that sent out the press releases to say this is what's happening. They believe they're being extorted. In George Foreman's words, that he said, I fought to have a great reputation and I'm going to fight to keep it. He would not be in a situation where he's going to be forced to be extorted. So they're going into court, which takes me to tried twice. Hung jury, first time, second time. Mr. Bill Cosby was convicted and sent to SEI Phoenix, was released on January 30th, 2021, after serving time at SEI Phoenix in the state of Pennsylvania. And it was literally on June 30th, he celebrated 1 year after the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court overturned that. I'm going to start with this question. And this is one of the questions that I had amongst colleagues as well. And we're having it in the barbershops and beauty salons and front porches around the country. Are Black celebrity men in particular with money, we in a day, particularly past hashtag Me Too, being accused of some type of sexual assault that goes back as far as 25 years? This one is going to be, I want you to be mindful as well, because it's a lot of information to cover. But we have R. Kelly, Mr. Cosby, and now George Foreman going into the courtroom. Andrew, you represented and still do represent Bill Cosby. Do you think that Black celebrity men are under attack?
Look, when the accusations and allegations was first waged against Mr. Cosby in 2014, in my first interview, I said this is assassination on Black men who are wealthy and successful in America. Mr. Cosby became the litmus test, tried, true, and tested on how to create a formula to destroy the legacy of a successful, wealthy Black man in America with no evidence and proof. Now we're seeing that with George Foreman. Also, I did work behind the scenes with R. Kelly's team for over 5 years. With attorney Raid Shalabi. He reached out to me, and the same thing I tried to tell Robert through his attorneys and giving them advice, getting them on the media to tell their story, Raid, is that, these people, R. Kelly, if you look at him, a documentary brought charges against him. Now, I've never seen in the Constitution where they say, hey, you have to show forth a documentary and then we'll bring criminal charges against you. It all started with Mr. Cosby. And we tried to warn in so many ways through interviews. And I definitely said, hey, look, this is not the end. He is the beginning of coming after so many Black men who are wealthy, who wants to own the rights to who they are. When you become too successful in America and you slip through the cracks as a black man, George Foreman with the George Foreman grill, everybody has one. Everybody bought one. Then people get to say, I want something from this person, and this person didn't give my career a start. And you look at now these look back laws, they're very, very dangerous. And I think this case is in California with Forman. And these women are claiming that their father worked for Forman and they were afraid to say anything and they were minors. And this look back law now gives any person the opportunity, if they were a minor, to come forward and say something happened with no evidence and proof. We saw it. All women came into a courtroom with only pictures, showing pictures of them with Mr. Cosby. Like pictures of them, like he would meet them in a club somewhere and take a picture. See, I was with him. One of the alleged accusers, she had a shrine on her wall of Mr. Cosby for the second trial that he was found guilty in. And they said, why did you keep the pictures? Well, they were memories. Well, why did you get on a plane and travel from St. Louis and follow him to each show? Because I was afraid for my life, and I got on a plane so he could rape me. I had no choice. they don't have to have any proof now. It's all about women don't lie, and we know that's a lie.
All
And
right.
so
Let's.
it's going to keep going. We see it now with Snoop Dogg, Chris Brown. You see it with Trey Songz now. And one of the problems that we had, they said, well, don't say anything. Our attorney, our former counsel, Marty Singer, who represents the Kardashians, Tom Cruise, all of the heavy hitters in LA, he made a comment and called these stories fantastical stories. And he was sued for defamation. And Mr. Cosby never said a word, didn't even know his attorney made that statement, and they sued Mr. Cosby for defamation. I think now we have to start speaking up and speaking out.
All right. Comments. I'll start with you, Tracy.
Frankie, in terms of black men being under assault, I think that, let me start by saying this. I think that no person, man or woman, should be subjected to sexual advances of another person that they do not consent to. Absolutely. However, there is a huge difference between rape and regret. Definitely, just let me say it again. Big difference between rape and regret. So there are some instances, particularly in the case with Mr. Cosby. In those cases, these were adult women who, according to, I wasn't there, but according to, some of the news reports that I saw, went to his room at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. They consented to ingesting pills or other drugs that were given to them at the time. Listen, I'm just going to tell you that I ain't always been no saint, and I ain't one today. However, there are just some things that I recognize what it is. With all due respect to women everywhere, no does mean no. However, now when I get that call at 2:30 in the morning, I know what's up. And so did they. There's a difference between rape and regret, and then after the fact, you regret that maybe you didn't get what you wanted out of it. So now I'm going to claim rape. No, I don't necessarily buy that. In the case of R. Kelly, though, the difference I think with R. Kelly, number one, let me say that in the case with R. Kelly, Mr. Kelly deserved every day that he was sentenced to. He absolutely did. Because of the nature of the offenses and the age of the victim. The thing that surprises me and puzzles me the most with R. Kelly is what are the agreements that they had with the other people? We have crimes called aiding and abetting in every state across the country. He didn't do this by himself. People helped him get these underage children there. I'm looking at the parents, and we're going back to the other conversation about parent accountability. Where were the parents? What kind of agreement did the state have? That the prosecutors have with these parents, that these parents were not prosecuted as well because they aided and abetted R. Kelly and they sold their children to R. Kelly. See, because my 15, 16-year-old ain't going nowhere. Being locked in nowhere where I can't see her. And if I can't be there, it's just not happening. So there's a difference between, again, like I said, rape and regret. I think there's a difference between Mr. Cosby's case and the case with R. Kelly because of the ages of the alleged victims in these cases. And with respect to, George Forman, Mr. Andrew absolutely alluded to, you can go back forever. And that's what's happening right now. Generally, when it comes to an adult, when the victim of a sexual assault is an adult, in Pennsylvania, for sure, the statute of limitations, Shaka, was it 10, 12 years when it's sexual assault? It's 12 years when the victim is an adult. So an adult victim, has 12 years to seek prosecution for an act that's committed against them. However, there is no such limitation on time when the assault occurs while the victim is still a minor. And so it leaves open floodgates for people. But I think that George Foreman's team was very smart in that they brought it to the forefront. Listen, they're just trying to get money. You get ahead of it. I'm not going to let y'all expose me that way. I'm going to expose myself. I'm going on the offense. I'm going to handle this matter by exposing you. So,
all right, Shaka.
So with these look back laws, as Andrew referred to, they were instituted and used very heavily, very heavily. They were a major piece of ammunition that prosecutors used when dealing with like the archdiocese and the Catholic priests, etc. Right? That is one area where you saw them being used, and I think there was generally, at least amongst the Black community, a consensus that was appropriate because of the kind of things we were hearing from members of the clergy and the kind of devastation we were hearing that it caused with their victims through the years. But those same look back laws, and hence, this is why I was talking about the slippery slope, Andrew, right? Because once you have a buy-in, once you have a universal buy-in from the majority, you don't need all, but from the majority of a particular community, the government usually takes that and they run with it. They extend it. They're always stretching the rubber band. Like what you give them is never enough, right? My grandmother's old saying, you give them an inch, they will take the field. They'll take the whole field if you give them an inch. And so while everybody bought into that, now they start using the look back laws in a different way, not as a shield, but a sword. The issue of Black men. The three that were highlighted on this particular show this morning are very dissimilarly situated. They are not in the same positions at all. Some of them can be qualified perhaps as victims themselves, and others, I think there's a community buy-in that there are in fact perpetrators to some extent. So they're not in the same posture, the three that we're talking about. I will say this though, it has become, and I'm just going to say it because I'm thinking it, it has become vogue to be a victim, right? It has just become very vogue and chic to be a victim, quite frankly. And some people may say, wow, that's pretty insensitive, but it's not, because I'm speaking about the kind of people who will rip the scar off of they'll rip the scar tissue over their own wounds for $1, for some publicity, to be talked about, to be relevant again. And so when you whore yourself out that way, okay, it's difficult for me to give you the same, I can't deal with you with white gloves on the same way I would do a different kind of victim, say a victim of child rape at the hands of a priest. That victim and someone who 30 years later says I was in a nightclub and I woke up next to a celebrity. I don't know what happened. He must have taken advantage of me and I won $12 million. Like, you don't get the same, level of sentiment from me. So I do think, though, to your point, and I'll say it straight away now, I do think there is an attack on, I think, celebrities at large, quite frankly. Yes, Black celebrities are, I think, on that list, but I don't think it's an exhaustive list, right? I think they are attacking anyone with means, anyone who has the ability to pay, and anyone who, by hitching my caboose to your train in this particular way, can make me relevant again, or make me relevant for the first time, quite frankly. And I want to be this, and they're given platforms. These victims are then given platforms to become spokespeople, to have shows, to have record deals, to have all sorts of things. So it's a windfall. It's a Christmas under the tree.
Yeah, and
look,
and I just want to say, and Andrew, and I want to say as well, because, and especially when you are a high-profile individual, even Shaka, to your point, across ethnic, racial lines, this is a financial issue or grab, which unfortunately for people who have been assaulted, where there are high-profile people, because there are high-profile people who have assaulted people. And when we muddy the water behind those people, I believe that you are referencing. And so we do have to be careful about that. However, and Andrew, you were getting ready to start, that one of the conversations we have all the time, and I've talked about it on my radio show, how many times when a person knows that they're a high-profile person, that they need to walk even softer because they're a high-profile person. Now, to the net of what we're talking about here, in each of these cases, with the exception of R. Kelly, and even in R. Kelly, we're going back 15, 20 years,
Right.
but in the case of George Foreman and Mr. Cosby, we're going back 25 and 30
40, 50 years. 40, 50 years. And there was a different climate then than there is now. But that you are a target because you are a high-profile individual. Well, it was a different era at that time. In the 60s and 70s, Cosby, Sammy Davis Jr., the Rat Pack, all of those guys walked around like regular guys. You knew when they came in the city where their hangout spots were, where restaurants. They didn't have entourages, okay? They didn't have security, okay? Their
But they
numbers
were
were
high
listed.
profile. But we knew they were high profile, and
We knew they was
they
high
were not the
profile,
average Joe, though, right?
but we knew that. But the numbers were listed in phone books. Okay, had a tendency, not knowing what the future held for them with social media and what's happening today that we see, they had a tendency to be too regular. They really did. And when you have a tendency to be regular, you set yourself up to not just be used, but misused by people. And so now we're seeing where they accuse blacks of playing the race card. Now you have women playing the victim card now. And they're abusing the victim card for true victims of sexual assault, because sexual assault does happen to women, many women, and boys and men as well. Boys and men just don't talk about it. In this past civil trial that we had in California, I was so amazed doing voir dire of how many men and young men raised their hand and said, I can't be a part of this because I was molested or sexually assaulted. I've never seen that before. They were open, and the judge specifically said to these people, I don't want to hear your story, but they just felt the need to tell their story.
Andrew, and let me say this, because in this forum, and I've interviewed you on a number of forums, and for the people who are watching, I just want to go back to something, because I don't want people to leave this show not thinking that we had this part of the conversation and giving you an opportunity to respond. We know that Mr. Cosby in the second trial was found guilty. He was incarcerated in SEI Phoenix in Pennsylvania. So he was found guilty in the second trial. And so what I'm hearing people watching this for the first time saying, are you suggesting that Mr. Cosby did nothing? Right? Are you saying that that nothing that he had been accused of or prosecuted for, eventually in the second trial found guilty? Are you suggesting that he did nothing illegal or wrong with any of the accusers that he was involved in that put him in prison for nearly 2 years? Let me go to you to respond to that question.
You want a PR person, Andrew? You want a PR man right now, or you got it? You want a PR person, or you got it?
No, I got this.
Okay.
He did nothing illegal. Mr. Cosby, if you go back and read his deposition, he talked about a culture in time. They took excerpts from the deposition and say he gave women quaaludes without their knowledge. Quaaludes, if you go look at the history of quaaludes, they were called disco biscuits. Quaaludes didn't cause paralysis, didn't cause you to not know who and where you were. So Mr. Cosby did nothing illegal. These were women who were looking for opportunities. Yes, was he a serial cheater? Yes. But that comes with the entertainment world. He has never denied that. That was worked out between and discussed behind closed doors between him and Mrs. Cosby. She was very aware of that, and they worked through it, and that's between the husband and wife. But did he rape and drug women? No. This is a man who was on Nixon's enemies list. The FBI watched him every day. He was number 126. And you mean to tell me a black man in the 60s and 70s was raping and drugging white women? No, it didn't happen. He has denied all of those allegations. But I tell people all the time, it was a TV show, The Talk. Sharon Osbourne made the comment. He admitted that he gave women drugs and he drugged them without their knowledge. I sent a message to Sharon and I read the deposition. I sent her an email and I sent her a copy of the deposition where he specifically said, did you give women quaaludes? Yes, I did. Did you give women drugs and quaaludes without their knowledge? No, I didn't. One of the accusers, Teresa Saraganese, was deposed, who's a former model. And she specifically stated in her deposition, yes, he was on stage. Soon as he got off stage, I asked him for 2 quaaludes. He gave them to me and we got in his Rolls Royce and went somewhere and had sex. So people don't take the time to read anything. They look at the headline and look, the media did their job with Bill Cosby. They did their job. They did a great job. Our goal and my goal was always to put the truth and the facts out. And that's what we were able to do. But I said, go read the deposition, go read the trial transcript. That deposition was never supposed to be used. Everybody said, well, why did he settle out of court? I explained why. Mr. Cosby, if you remember,
if you can give me this, Andrew, and as about 2 minutes, go.
I want to give it to you really quick. Mr. Cosby, 20 years ago, his son was murdered in Los Angeles, shot in the head, caught a flat tire, shot in the head. Then months later, he was being extorted by Autumn Jackson, Sean Thompson's mother, for $40 million, saying that Mr. Cosby was her father. So, Mr. Cosby warned Sean to talk to her daughter. He even went and took a DNA test, and the young lady refused to go and get tested herself. And the FBI showed up at a coffee shop. His attorney, Jack Schmidt, wore a wire. So in 2005, when Andrea Constand became upset that Mr. Cosby stopped taking her calls and stood her and her mother up and her family at a comedy show in Canada, he was supposed to have dinner. Then she sat in the audience and cried and said, I better tell you, he did something to me. No, this was all because he settled out because he didn't want to deal with any more issues. Had just lost his son, being extorted. So he decided to settle out. But we saw what happened. Somebody took a deposition he gave. He was forced to go to civil court, settle out, and then they used it against him. However, Mr. Cosby is innocent. He was found, we always like to say, and I always remind people, this guy was found not guilty by the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court. We won 2 victories with the United States Supreme Court. Kathleen McGee case was thrown out, who was Sammy Davis Jr.'s girlfriend, mistress, when she filed with the United States Supreme Court, and the right of certiorari that Steele filed to try to get the ruling with the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court overturned. So, look, we've seen this story before. I just pray that George Forman attorneys fight this vigorously and expose these women. That's what it's all about. You have to expose them for who and what they are.
All right,
Frankie,
Tracy.
if I may, just to follow up on that, and I want to correct you, Andrew, with all due respect. I understand what your job is here and what your role is in this case with Mr. Cosby. However, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court did not find him innocent. What the Supreme Court did in Pennsylvania was they issued a ruling that his prosecution was unlawful because of the agreement that he reached with the prosecutor.
That's innocence for us, Attorney Johnson. That's innocent for America. So that was vacated. It was vacated because his constitutional rights was violated, and the case should have never moved forward. So that's innocent for us.
The case should have never moved forward. However, the court did not say that he didn't do those things. The judge said he should not have been prosecuted. Chief Justice Behr said that it was a reprehensible bait and switch of his constitutional rights, and that's a direct absolutely.
Quote.
And
so
it was,
that was innocence. That's innocence for us.
I hear you, but it ain't.
Take your wins where you can, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, trust me, we do it.
That's innocence for us. So
that's our business. Hey. We do it. However, again, the court didn't say he didn't do it. The court didn't say he was innocent. What they said was his prosecution was unlawful. And Frankie, even back when this was happening, we had conversations on more than one Sunday about it on the show, because at the essence of that prosecution was an agreement that he had with the prosecutor back then, that what he said in that deposition, that he would never, that those statements would never be used against him in any kind of criminal prosecution. And let us be mindful is that Andrea Constand, she agreed to it back then. She absolutely agreed to it because she had the ability to seek criminal charges against him at that time and did not follow that suit because what she wanted was the monetary gain. Same thing with the George Foreman accusers. Because there's no statute of limitations with respect to the sexual assaults in California, they have the ability to have George criminally prosecuted. But that's not the route they chose to go. They actually decided, you know what, we want $25 million because they want $12.5 million each from George. So they're looking again for their monetary gain, and we have to be mindful of that.
And because the person, I'm being the angel's advocate. And so, are you saying, Attorney Burns, because in a case like this, and I'll try and do as much legalese and Andrew, with your background, that when a person says, at this point, 45 years later, I've done the necessary healing I needed to do, being the angel's advocate. So at least I should get some kind of monetary. The fact that a person would go after an individual monetarily and not criminally, they're less believable.
Frankie, if I'm that true victim and I'm hurting, he hurt my life. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Get him locked up.
When you have the choice to do both. There are some instances when you don't have the choice.
Right.
And so I think when you have the choice to do both and you choose, because one is complete retribution for what you've done. That's what we think a victim would want. Another one is financial recompense when usually that other avenue has been disavowed from you. They're both still available under California law.
You can do both at the same time. One is not predicated on the other.
Not at all.
Well, look in California.
Let me let Shaka finish, and then
Shaka,
because I think it's going to speak to and Andrew, I think it's going to speak to what you're getting ready to say relative to recent. So Shaka, finish your point, and then Andrew, I think you can answer.
A lot of times, and again, sidebar asterisk, there are true victims. Let me just be clear. But when people are attempting to get a civil judgment out of this, a lot of times they will allow the criminal process to do the work for them. So they'll let things go the criminal route, because you have prosecutors, unlike civil attorneys, that you don't have to pay. All you have to do is make an allegation. You wage war, and then you can sit back and allow those criminal prosecutors to do the work for you. They'll do the investigation. They'll do all of that on the taxpayer's dime, right? They'll bring you to court. They'll create a record. They'll have hearings. All of that is on our tax dollar. When that is done, you have a monument of evidence now to get a civil case going, right?
Absolutely.
And sometimes once you've waged that criminal war, now you have a self-made bargaining tool. You're facing this, but we're going to file judgment on this, and now you can wheel and deal and negotiate on the civil matter, all predicated on the usage of the criminal justice system.
Frankie, criminal prosecution makes the road to the money much easier.
Right. Right. And that's what these women, and I go back to Cosby, you had 60 women to come forward who had an opportunity before any statute expired to bring criminal charges against him. And so he did these horrible things and horrific things to them. It never was about that. It was all about the greenback, the dollar, the almighty dollar. In this last case we just got of, and people want to say, well, no, Red wants to say it wasn't a victory for us. Yes, it was. Mr. Cosby the jury only awarded her $500,000, Judy Huff. But we got no punitive damages. If he had been,
let me let you. And Andrew, I want you, because you started talking about that. You need to give the front end of that, because that was the most recent trial in California.
We just got out.
If you can give it to me quickly, the jury verdict.
We just got a civil trial with Judith Huff versus Bill Cosby. This case has been going on for 7 years. Gloria Allred represented Ms. Huff, who claims that Mr. Cosby invited her to the Playboy Mansion and he forced her to masturbate him at the Playboy Mansion. All she had was pictures. Well, the case was given a permanent stay because of his conviction. And then August of last year, Allred became upset because the conviction was overturned. And so she said, well, I'm going to ask the judge to remove the permanent stay. We said, please go forward and do that. So we just got out of trial back in June. And the jury came back finding that Mr. Cosby did, in fact, invite a minor. The young lady, she changed her age in the 11th hour so many times. Judith Huff did, Miss Huff. But we did find that Mr. Cosby invited a minor to the Playboy Mansion. But we're only going to award her $500,000. but no punitive damages. If he had been found guilty of punitive damages that day, we would have had to write, because there was no cap, we would have had to write a check for $20 million that day. She was awarded $500,000. She has a $4 million legal bill with Gloria Allred. And she would never get to see a dime of that money, because once the judge makes his final judgment, which he's refusing to do, we will appeal that $500,000.
And you're saying she'll never get the $500,000. Why?
Well, because it's going to be appealed. It's going to be held up for 2 to 3 years. And if she was to get the money in 3 years and the appeal gets denied, our appeal, she has a $4 million plus legal bill.
All right.
So what I'm saying, this is all of these cases are about extortion. Gloria Allred has a system. She has a rule. She knows how to go after successful black men. Shaquille O'Neal settled with her. His agent reached out to me and said, "Man, tell Uncle Bill to settle." We signed an agreement with her that she could never come after Shaq again for the rest of her life and his life. Tiger Woods had to settle with her. Kevin Hart had to settle with her daughter, Lisa Bloom, because he basically said that the woman that he did have an affair with, he defamed her by saying he did when he did. So he settled out of court. Look, these women like Allred and Lisa Bloom, her daughter, they have a formula. They have a formula to come after successful black men. And I would be intrigued to know who's behind these women coming after George Foreman. Is it Gloria Allred? Is she going to jump on the bandwagon now because she sees the dollar sign and she has this egregious behavior when it comes to black successful men?
I asked you this on the radio show as well, and I'm going to have to get ready to wrap up in the next probably 4 minutes. I'll give each of you an opportunity to just give your closing statements on each of the topics we talked about today. But I did mention to you, if the opportunity, and I hope that it does become available, Andrew and Gloria Allred is available to come on the show. Would you be willing to come on? Frankie's got a big mouth, and everybody on the show would have a big mouth. I'd have to really kind of monitor that.
Look. All I'm going to say to you is that I just want 15% because your show is going to be purchased by Spotify, and for $200 million, your purchase would be the new the black female Joe Rogan. Okay.
Listen, have you ever had an opportunity to speak one-on-one with Gloria Allred?
As far as in an interview?
Anywhere, period. On the corner, crossing the street, even the courtroom.
Allred in California came up to me every day and told me how much she admired me and respected me.
But would never come on a show like this one.
But I'm going to sing this week. She's never going to ever come on this show. She's not going to come on the show to have a conversation with me. I'm talking about, this is a woman who stood up in court 3 times and tried to get me removed just back in June. Who first lied on me and said that I was talking to a reporter in front of jurors. And the white female reporter stood up to the judge, Judge Carlin, and said, "Judge, no, he didn't. He just walked by me and said hello." Second time she tried to get me removed, she told the judge, she stood up in court and said, "Andrew has called the women hoes in front of the jurors and sitting next to the alternates," because the courtroom was small.
Yeah.
And I said, I never did that.
Okay.
The judge called each person. Allred is not going to come on this show, but she does, I'm telling you, I want my 15%.
All right. I won't negotiate a number publicly where the show is being recorded, but for sure. Andrew, and I only because I want to wrap up the show. The information in the show has been so wonderful. Last thing, why make it solely about race?
Because it is, we have seen the formula, and it's the history of America. When you want to destroy a black man, you use sex in a white woman. And that has always been the history of America, to go after black men. You parade white women out and then you sprinkle a little black pepper in and make it believable. And that's been the history of America. But I always tell everybody, Frankie, is that we cannot fight corruption. We have to fight and destroy corrupt people. And that's the goal, what I'm doing today, to highlight that. Because Mr. Cosby was a litmus test, and we do have that formula. We know what happened, and we know what they're going to do to George Foreman. I can tell you, they'll go file the lawsuit. Once they file the lawsuit, they'll start doing the publicity and they'll start doing the press conferences. The women won't say anything. They would just read a script. The formula is there. And then social media, because social media was created to take black people away from current events of the day, they just get the sound bite on social media and then they let that take fire. And the mainstream media latches on and it destroys the reputation. Nobody wants to touch the individual and then they lose their endorsement deals.
All right, great. I'll start with you, Attorney Burns, your closing comments.
Frankie, with respect to just going back to the curfew issue, I really wish we could go back to a society where the village participated and was a part, and the village held a responsibility in the raising of the children in its neighborhoods. I also believe that I believe that the church is also another very important part of my childhood that is sorely missing today. And then with respect to the issue of sexual assault and all that's going on, I'll say it again. No person, male or female, deserves to be subjected to the unwanted sexual advances of another. However, there is a difference between rape and regret.
All right. I thank you so much. Attorney Shaka Johnson.
I think that my takeaway from this is, what Andrew said earlier about it was a different time back when those guys were too ordinary. And I received that. I accept that is true. And so that means the Chris Browns and the Trey Songz and those folks from this modern day era, I think listen, let me be clear about this, Frankie. I am no celebrity. I'm just a guy who knows a couple of people. But even little old me, like, you have to be mindful. Even Andrew, he's recognized at the lunch counter by a gentleman who's, serving. We have to behave ourselves. And that is that's not a subjective term, right? Because that's what got Cuba Gooding and a whole bunch of others jammed up. I'm talking about it's an objective term. You have to behave yourself. Like, we have to be on our best behavior. And if you walk and behave like you're being watched, if you move and behave like someone is going to put a case on you, if you move like that, and it's a shame, but that is the society we live in. So we can talk about the separate and aside from the true victims. If we talk about the women who are out here as prey and using the successful black man or just a successful financial individual as as the predators, and using those gentlemen as the prey. But what I'm saying is, if I know that I am potential prey, I recognize that. I have to maneuver and handle my business slightly differently. And so I'm just saying that we wear some onus as well.
All right,
Frankie, that applies to women as well, because you and I know that we have to walk the very same way.
Yeah,
and what you said, Shaka, is correct. Look, I've been through that situation, and Mrs. Cosby had to call me and warn me, and because people do know me, and she said, you're now a target, because when people see you, they see my husband's money, they see his wealth. And I dealt with that situation in 2020 with a young lady I was seeing in Philadelphia, 9 months, and ended up, tried to make an accusation against me because it boiled down to something that they wanted financially. And I'm a witness to that. I had to go to a courtroom, the same courtroom that Mr. Cosby trial was held at, to defend that in 2020, in November 2020. So I always say that, I had to realize, because Mrs. Cosby called me and said, you're no longer a regular person anymore. Mm-hmm. You can't move regularly anymore. When you go out on a date with a woman now, don't pick her up, make her meet you. And if she has too much to drink, get her an Uber. And I've had to do that. Don't take her home. Don't put yourself in those situations, because now the rules have changed. And the rules are no longer the same anymore. So, well said, and this is a very informative show. And I think there needs to be a part 2, 3, and 4 where attorneys like yourselves could talk about the new rules and how they have changed. Because young men need to be educated now that you can bump up against a woman in a crowded room and touch her butt accidentally, and she could say you sexually assaulted her. Yeah. But these young men don't know that today, who are pledging these fraternities. My fraternity,
football players who
football
are going
players,
to
they don't,
colleges
they don't,
and
right,
yeah.
they don't know the rules have changed,
Mm-hmm.
and there needs to be some form of education or some form of summit held by you, Tracy, and Shaka, with attorneys that look like us and attorneys
Mm-hmm.
that are young that can still approach the younger
Well,
generation.
and let me say this
So,
because I want to make sure we're clear about this. And I've talked to, and I've had it on my show, athletes who, especially older athletes, who are talking to young athletes going off to college. And there are, I know on the NFL side, where they're actually doing workshops with their new employees, the new recruits that are playing for these teams, talking about these pitfalls that they could, fall into. Want to be real clear. I think even on the social media piece, across the board, our young people understanding what the laws are. If somebody sends a picture of a girl in their class and the girl is nude and they send it to friends, if that
Oh boy.
friend sent that photo to another
Right.
friend, they're thinking, I just sent it to Tracy to show Tracy. Well, you are suborning legally. You are
Dissemination of
sharing.
okay.
You are
Right.
sharing incorrect. So the social media piece, legally, and all of that, which you should and shouldn't do, we
Mm-hmm.
are in a different day,
well,
and there's a
well,
conversation about it all.
well,
All right.
you see what Black China just had. Rob Kardashian settle out with her for revenge porn. You
Yeah.
know, sending that picture out. So you're right, but Frankie, I think this podcast needs to be a town hall,
Yeah.
podcast where people like Attorney Burns and Shaka come on and educate people, because I see bigger issues
Okay.
and people who don't have the means and resources like a Bill Cosby to hire me or whomever to hire me to help them. They're going to be out here lost
Yeah.
in the water.
Yeah.
Lady and gentlemen, I have got to go. This was so great. Thank you so much. This is the first. Make sure that you check it out on the iHeart Radio app, wherever you get your podcasts. Of course, I want to thank the team at Real Times Media as well. And of course, you'll be able to link through a number of networks, including the Black Information Network. So thank you guys so very, very much for joining me. Attorney Tracy Burns, Attorney Shaka Johnson, and Purpose PR CEO Andrew Wyatt. Thank you for being here each and every week. Come back, check it out, Google us, you'll find it. Frankie's got a big mouth with the big guests and the big information. Come back to see us and listen or watch.